The cabin speaker crackled above seat 8A as the captain asked if any current or former combat pilots were on board. Jennifer Collins jabbed the armrest beside my sleeping daughter and whispered to the flight attendant, "Not him, he has been out cold for an hour." Her sleeve pushed against Maya's blanket, and the plastic cup on my tray jumped as the aircraft dropped hard. The flight map froze on the screen ahead, then flashed back to black. My hand stayed near the worn kneeboard card tucked inside my jacket, the one with manual trim notes for this aircraft family. Jennifer had just dismissed the only man in her row who understood what that sound meant. The engines did not sound right. Not completely wrong. Just uneven enough to make old training wake before my body did. A soft chime rang overhead. Then another. The flight attendant tried to smile, but her eyes moved toward the cockpit door. Maya stirred against my shoulder. She was 10 years old, small for her age, wrapped in a gray hoodie, her braids tucked beneath the hood. I kept my breathing steady so she would not wake afraid. That was the first job. Always the first job. Keep the child calm before the room understands danger. Jennifer leaned away from us like fear had made her cleaner than everyone else. She was dressed in a cream blazer, gold earrings, and the kind of confidence that did not need volume until it was threatened. "Is this normal?" she asked the attendant. The attendant did not answer fast enough. That made the question heavier. Across the aisle, a man clutched his tablet with both hands. A woman 2 rows forward stopped praying under her breath when the aircraft steadied. Then the nose dipped again. Just a few feet. Enough to send a spoon sliding off a tray. It hit the floor with a bright metal snap. The sound cut through the cabin like a warning. I opened my eyes. The overhead lights looked too sharp. The air smelled like coffee, cold air, and nervous skin. Maya's hand tightened around my sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered. "I am here," I said. My voice came out low. Even. She had heard that voice before during thunderstorms, emergency room waits, and nights when rent had been late. It meant, "Stay close." It meant breathe with me. Jennifer heard it too. Her mouth tightened. She looked at me for the first time like I was awake enough to inconvenience her. "The captain asked for combat pilots," she said, almost accusing me. "Not passengers who fell asleep before takeoff." I did not answer. I watched the flight attendant instead. She had pressed one hand against the galley wall. Her other hand held the service phone. Her lips moved once. Then stopped. Something from the cockpit had cut her off. The cabin went quieter than silence. Phones lowered. Seatbelts clicked tighter. Somewhere behind us, a child began to cry, then was hushed by a trembling parent. The captain came back on, but this time his voice carried strain beneath the calm. "If anyone on board has military fast jet or combat aviation experience, please identify yourself to the nearest crew member." Jennifer turned toward the aisle, scanning faces that looked more acceptable to her. Business suits. Gray hair. Expensive watches. She never looked back at me. Maya did. Her eyes searched mine. I kissed the top of her forehead and reached for the card inside my jacket. Then the cockpit door opened a few inches. The cockpit door opened a few inches. A flight attendant stepped through and immediately pulled it closed behind her. The movement was fast. Practiced. But not calm. Her eyes swept across the cabin. Row by row. Face by face. She was looking for someone. The engines continued their steady roar overhead. Yet another sound sat beneath it now. A faint vibration. Uneven. Rhythmic. Maya felt it too. She lifted her head from my shoulder and rubbed one eye. "Daddy, why is everyone so quiet?" she asked. I brushed a hand across her hair. "Because they are listening." The flight attendant moved toward the front rows first. 2 men raised their hands. One claimed he flew private aircraft years ago. Another said he had logged a few hundred hours in small planes. She thanked them both. Her smile never reached her eyes. Jennifer watched eagerly. Every time the attendant stopped, Jennifer seemed relieved. Every time she moved on, that relief faded. A sharp tremor ran through the aircraft. Several overhead bins rattled. A bottle rolled beneath a seat. Someone gasped. The seatbelt sign flashed again. The flight attendant steadied herself against a headrest. Then she continued searching. Maya leaned closer to me. "Are we okay?" she whispered. I looked toward the front of the cabin. Right now, yes. That answer mattered. Children know when adults lie. Across the aisle, a businessman stopped typing. His laptop screen reflected nervous faces from nearby rows. A woman farther back crossed herself quietly. The smell of reheated coffee drifted from the galley. It mixed with something metallic from the air system. The aircraft dipped again. Not much. Just enough for everyone to notice. The attendant finally reached our row. Jennifer spoke before she could. "I told you already. He was asleep." The attendant blinked. "Ma'am." Jennifer nodded toward me. "The captain asked for combat pilots. He is traveling with a child." Maya looked down. I felt her hand tighten around mine. The attendant glanced between us. Then her eyes settled on the card resting partly visible near my jacket pocket. Not the card itself. The way it was worn. Used. Familiar. She hesitated. "Sir," she said quietly, "have you ever flown military aircraft?" Jennifer actually laughed. A short laugh. Sharp and dismissive. She had already decided what my answer should be. I ignored her. "What happened in the cockpit?" I asked. The attendant swallowed. For a second she seemed grateful that someone had asked the right question. "The captain needs qualified help," she said. "That is all I can say." Another tremor rolled through the cabin. This one lasted longer. Glasses vibrated against tray tables. A baby started crying near the rear lavatory. The attendant looked toward the cockpit door again. Then back at me. Her expression changed. Not panic. Hope. Small but real. Maya looked up at me. "Daddy?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I squeezed her hand gently. "Everything is fine." Then I unfastened my seatbelt. The metal buckle clicked loudly in the silence. Several heads turned. Jennifer stared at me as if I had stood up during a movie she was trying to watch. I reached into my jacket and removed the worn leather holder. The attendant saw the wings first. Her eyes widened. Then she saw the faded military insignia beneath them. The color left her face. She took one slow breath. Before she could say a word, the cabin speaker crackled again. The cabin speaker crackled again. Every conversation stopped instantly. Even the crying baby near the back grew quieter for a moment. The captain's voice returned. Calm on the surface. Tight underneath. If the individual who identified military fast jet experience is willing to assist, please notify a crew member immediately. The attendant beside me did not wait. Her eyes remained fixed on the insignia in my hand. She had already made her decision. Jennifer looked from the badge to my face and back again. The certainty she carried all flight began to slip. "That cannot be what I think it is," she said. Nobody answered her. Maya shifted in her seat and rubbed her eyes. The overhead lights reflected softly across her face. "Daddy, are you leaving?" she asked. I crouched beside her. The aircraft trembled again. This time the vibration came with a low shudder through the floor. Several passengers grabbed their armrests. Only for a little while, I said. You stay right here. She nodded, but her hand stayed wrapped around mine. A flight attendant from the rear cabin appeared beside us. He looked younger. Nervous. His tie sat slightly crooked. He glanced at the insignia and immediately straightened. That reaction told me more than words could. Something serious was happening ahead. The first attendant lowered her voice. Captain Hayes would like to speak with you. The name caught my attention. Not because I recognized it. Because the attendant expected me to. Interesting. I stood slowly. The seat belt sign remained illuminated. A few passengers watched openly now. Others pretended not to. Jennifer stared as if the last 10 minutes had rewritten the entire flight. You are actually going up there? She asked. If they need help. She blinked. The answer seemed to bother her more than the badge. Across the aisle, the businessman with the laptop closed it completely. His screen went dark. A woman near the window whispered something to her husband. The atmosphere had changed. Earlier the cabin held annoyance and curiosity. Now it held expectation. Maya reached into her backpack and pulled out a small stuffed elephant. The gray fabric was worn from years of use. She pressed it into my hand. For luck, she whispered. I smiled despite everything. I think you need it more than I do. She shook her head. Take it. I slipped the elephant into my jacket pocket. The attendant noticed. So did Jennifer. Neither said a word. Another tremor rolled through the aircraft. Stronger this time. Overhead compartments rattled. Plastic cups jumped against tray tables. Someone near the rear gasped. The younger attendant instinctively reached for a seat back. His knuckles turned white. Then the vibration stopped. The silence afterward felt heavier than the shaking itself. The first attendant touched her earpiece. She listened for several seconds. Then her expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Sir, she said carefully, the captain just asked for your name. I looked toward the cockpit door. The narrow aisle suddenly felt much longer than before. Darius Walker. She repeated it into the microphone. Nothing happened for a second. Then her eyes widened. She pressed the earpiece harder against her ear. Yes, Captain, she said quietly. Her voice almost disappeared. When she looked back at me, the color had left her face. She swallowed once. Then stepped aside to clear the aisle. He says he remembers you. The attendant stepped aside and the aisle suddenly belonged to me. Nobody spoke. The engines droned overhead. The air felt colder than before. Jennifer stared as if she wanted an explanation and hated that she was not getting one. Maya looked up from her seat and gave me a small nod. Brave. Much braver than most adults on the plane. I touched her shoulder gently. I will be right back. She held the stuffed elephant tighter and watched me step into the aisle. The younger attendant moved ahead of me. His pace was quick. Not quite running. Not quite walking. Every few rows another passenger turned to look. Some had heard the captain's announcement. Others had simply noticed the change in the crew. Fear spreads fast inside a metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground. Another vibration moved through the aircraft. Longer this time. The overhead panels buzzed softly. A woman closed her eyes and gripped a necklace around her neck. A man whispered into his phone even though there was no signal. Everyone wanted control. Nobody had it. The cockpit door remained closed now. A flight attendant waited beside it. She looked relieved when she saw me approaching. That reaction told me plenty. The crew had already run out of easy options. She pressed a button beside the door. A short tone sounded. Then she leaned closer. "Captain, he is here." Silence followed. 3 seconds. 4. Then the lock clicked. The door opened just enough for me to step through. Bright instrument lights spilled into the cabin. The smell hit me first. Warm electronics. Coffee. Stale air. The smell never changes. Not really. The captain sat forward in his seat. Gray hair. Strong jaw. Reading glasses hanging from his shirt pocket. His eyes locked onto mine the moment I entered. For a second neither of us spoke. The first officer sat beside him, pale but conscious. Sweat covered his forehead. He looked exhausted. Not injured. Not unconscious. Just struggling. The captain stared at me as if he had seen a ghost. "Darius Walker," he said quietly. I nodded once. His grip tightened on the controls. "I cannot believe it." The word sounded almost personal. The first officer looked between us. Confused. Another warning tone chirped from one of the panels. The captain silenced it immediately. Outside the windshield, darkness stretched endlessly ahead. Clouds reflected faint moonlight. The aircraft remained stable, but barely. Small corrections appeared every few seconds. Tiny movements. Constant adjustments. The kind passengers never notice. The kind pilots never ignore. "Tell me what happened," I said. The captain turned back toward the instruments. His professionalism returned instantly. "We lost part of our navigation reference system after turbulence." He pointed toward a display. "Then my first officer started experiencing severe vertigo." The younger pilot closed his eyes briefly. "I am sorry, Captain." "Stop apologizing," the captain said. "Focus on breathing." I moved closer. The instrument lights reflected across the glass. Several readings were fluctuating. Not catastrophically. But enough to create workload. Enough to create risk. The captain glanced toward me again. I requested combat pilots because I remembered something. Another alert flashed amber. He cancelled it. Years ago, there was a pilot who stayed calm when everyone else was overwhelmed. His voice grew quieter. His name was Darius Walker. The first officer looked at me differently after that. Not impressed. Curious. The dangerous kind of curiosity that arrives when someone realizes there is a larger story in the room. I studied the displays for several more seconds. Then another warning light illuminated briefly before disappearing. The captain saw it. So did I. Neither of us liked what it meant. Then he pointed toward a screen near the center console. The captain pointed toward a screen near the center console. A cluster of navigation data flickered in and out. Numbers appeared. Disappeared. Returned again. Not enough to lose control of the aircraft. Enough to make every decision slower. Every correction harder. The first officer sat back and pressed 2 fingers against his temple. His eyes stayed closed for several seconds. The cockpit lighting painted sharp shadows across his face. He looked frustrated more than frightened. That was a good sign. Frustrated pilots still think clearly. Panicked ones do not. Another amber message flashed briefly. Then vanished. The captain exhaled through his nose. "There." He pointed again. "That is the 3rd time in 15 minutes. I studied the display. The aircraft remained stable. Airspeed was stable. Altitude was stable. But the system was asking questions faster than the crew could comfortably answer them. Outside the windshield, darkness stretched in every direction. No horizon. No city lights. Just cloud tops reflecting pale moonlight. The kind of night that makes instruments feel like your entire world. The captain glanced toward me. You see it? I nodded. I see it. The first officer opened his eyes. Tell me I am not imagining this. You are not. He almost smiled. Almost. The cockpit fell quiet again except for the hum of electronics and the steady roar of engines. Then another vibration passed through the airframe. Light. Brief. Yet everyone in the cockpit noticed it. The captain adjusted a setting. The movement was smooth. Experienced. We can keep flying, he said. But I do not like surprises. Neither did I. A flight attendant stepped through the door carrying bottled water. Her face looked pale beneath the cockpit lighting. She handed one bottle to the first officer. How is the cabin? The captain asked. Nervous. She hesitated. People are asking questions. The captain nodded once. That means they still trust us enough to ask. The attendant looked at me. Recognition had begun replacing uncertainty. Not because of rank. Not because of stories. Because the crew had seen the captain relax slightly after I entered. People noticed changes like that. The attendant left. The door closed again. The first officer took a slow drink of water. You really flew fighters? He asked. I looked at the instruments. A long time ago. Combat? The captain answered before I could. Enough combat. His voice carried weight. The first officer looked between us. Another piece of a puzzle he could not yet see. The aircraft shuddered again. This time a little stronger. Loose papers shifted across a side console. The captain stabilized them with one hand. Then he looked directly at me. When they told me your name, I thought they were mistaken. He shook his head once. 20 years. I said nothing. There was work to do first. Stories could wait. The captain seemed to understand. He focused on the displays again. Several seconds passed. Then the radio crackled. A controller's voice filled the cockpit. Calm. Professional. The captain responded immediately. His words were measured. Precise. Yet when the transmission ended, he stared at the navigation display longer than before. What is it? I asked. He tapped the screen gently. Weather changed ahead. The first officer looked up. How bad? The captain did not answer immediately. Outside the windshield, a distant flash illuminated the clouds. Not lightning directly ahead. Off to the side. Far away. For now. The cockpit grew quieter. Then another message appeared across the display, and this one stayed on the screen. The message stayed illuminated in amber across the display. Nobody spoke for a moment. The cockpit lighting reflected off the captain's glasses as he read it again. The first officer leaned forward slowly. His color had improved a little, but not much. Outside the windshield, another distant flash lit the clouds for half a second. Then darkness returned. Weather deviation recommended, the captain said quietly. 40 miles south. I studied the screen. The recommendation itself was not alarming. What bothered me was the timing. First the navigation reference problems. Then the first officer's vertigo. Now a weather system growing faster than expected. Small problems have a habit of introducing larger ones. The radio crackled again. Another aircraft requested a route change. Then another. The captain listened carefully. Traffic was beginning to stack up around the weather. That made every decision more complicated. The first officer rubbed his forehead. I hate this feeling. His voice sounded stronger than before. You are doing fine, I said. He nodded once. The reassurance mattered more than he admitted. Another soft chime sounded from a nearby panel. Not urgent. Not yet. The captain adjusted a control and checked a secondary display. Fuel is fine, he said. Options are still good. Options. That was the word everyone wanted to hear. In aviation, options mean time. Time means safety. A knock sounded behind us. 2 quick taps. The flight attendant opened the door slightly and stepped inside. Captain. Go ahead. Passengers are noticing the course adjustments. The captain nodded. Expected. One woman is demanding answers. I already knew who that was. The attendant glanced toward me and almost smiled. She is also asking questions about Mr. Walker. The captain looked amused despite everything. Tell her he is busy. The attendant actually laughed. The first real laugh I had heard since entering the cockpit. It lasted only a second, but it changed the air in the room. She left. The door closed again. The engines continued their steady roar. Beneath it, I could hear the small sounds pilots learned to notice. Airflow. Trim corrections. Minor changes in vibration. The language of an aircraft speaking through motion instead of words. Another flash illuminated the clouds ahead. Closer now. Not dangerous. Just closer. The captain checked the weather radar. A cluster of colors spread across the display. Green. Yellow. Small pockets of red. Growing faster, he said. The first officer looked up. Can we get around it? Yes. The captain paused. If everything else behaves. Nobody liked that sentence. The radio crackled once more. This time the controller's voice sounded busier. More aircraft were requesting reroutes. More crews were adjusting plans. The system around us was becoming crowded. I watched the radar carefully. A pattern began to emerge. Not a dangerous one. An inconvenient one. Sometimes inconvenience creates risk simply by increasing workload. The captain noticed the same thing. You see it? He asked. Yes. He nodded. No further explanation was needed. We were thinking about the same problem. The first officer followed our eyes across the display. Then understanding appeared on his face. Traffic compression. Exactly, the captain said. For several seconds the cockpit settled into focused silence. Each person had a task. Each task mattered. Then the captain looked at me again. You still have not asked how I know your name. Another flash reflected across the windshield. There will be time for that later, I said. He studied me for a moment. Then a small smile appeared. You have not changed. The first officer looked confused again. Before he could ask another question, a new transmission came through the radio. The captain listened. His expression hardened immediately. He reached for the microphone. The controller had just given us information that changed the entire situation. The captain lowered the microphone slowly after the transmission ended. The cockpit felt smaller. Quieter. Even the steady hum of the aircraft seemed farther away. The first officer sat upright. His fatigue vanished for a moment beneath. Pure concentration. What did they say? He asked. The captain looked at the weather display. Then at the navigation screen. The airport we plan to use is beginning flow restrictions. The first officer blinked. Because of the storm. Because of the storm and everyone trying to avoid it at the same time. Outside the windshield, another flash illuminated the clouds. Much closer now. The radar painted a larger picture than the window could. Aircraft from multiple directions were being compressed into fewer routes. Fewer options. More workload. I studied the moving symbols across the display. The captain was right. None of the individual problems were catastrophic. Together, they were becoming something else. The radio came alive again. One crew requested a different altitude. Another requested a different heading. Controllers responded quickly, but the pace was increasing. The first officer adjusted his headset. "This is turning into a busy night." "Yes," the captain said. "And busy nights punish mistakes." The cockpit fell silent again. I glanced toward the cabin door. Somewhere behind it sat Maya. She would be watching every flight attendant who walked by. Listening for clues in their faces. She had always been observant. More than most adults. The thought grounded me. It always did. A soft alert sounded from one of the displays. The captain acknowledged it immediately. Navigation reference just flickered again. I saw it happen. A brief interruption. Then normal. Then another interruption. Tiny. But present. The first officer leaned closer. "Can it stabilize?" "Maybe," the captain said. Nobody liked maybe. Another knock came from the cabin side of the door. The flight attendant entered carrying a folded note. Her expression looked different this time. More composed. "Captain, several passengers wanted me to give you this." He accepted the paper and unfolded it. I expected complaints. Questions. Instead, dozens of handwritten seat numbers covered the page. Beside them were short messages. "Praying for the crew. Thank you. Stay safe. We trust you." The captain stared at the note for a moment. Then handed it to the first officer. Neither spoke. Sometimes. People help without touching a control or reading a checklist. The attendant smiled faintly. The little girl in row 8 asked if her father was helping. My eyes moved toward her. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth." The attendant's smile widened slightly. "I told her everyone seems calmer because he is up here." Then she left. The door closed softly behind her. The first officer looked down at the note again. "Passengers actually did this?" "Looks like it." The captain returned his attention to the instruments. Yet something had shifted. The tension remained. The problems remained. But the isolation was gone. We were no longer carrying the entire weight alone. Another flash lit the clouds ahead. This time it revealed towering shapes in the darkness. Massive formations stretching upward into the night. The weather system was growing. The captain adjusted the radar range. More color appeared. More movement. More complexity. The radio crackled once again. This transmission lasted longer. The controller's voice sounded urgent but controlled. The captain listened without interrupting. When the message ended, he did not reach for the microphone immediately. He simply stared ahead through the windshield. "Captain?" the first officer asked. The older pilot exhaled slowly. Then he looked directly at me. "Darius," he said quietly, "they just offered us a route nobody else has taken tonight." The captain kept his eyes on the weather display. The glow from the instruments painted faint blue light across his face. Outside the windshield, the clouds looked taller now. Darker. The radio hissed softly between transmissions. "Nobody else has taken it?" I asked. The captain shook his head. "Not tonight." The first officer leaned forward. His headache seemed forgotten for the moment. "Why?" The captain tapped the radar screen. A narrow corridor stretched between two growing weather cells. "Because it only opened 12 minutes ago." The cockpit fell silent. 12 minutes was not a long time at cruising speed. The route was new. Untested. Changing. Another flash illuminated the clouds. This one came from deeper inside the weather system. The radar painted more yellow than before. The captain adjusted the range again. The corridor remained there. Thin. Precise. Almost inviting. The first officer studied it carefully. If it stays open. Exactly, the captain said. The aircraft vibrated lightly beneath our feet. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind everyone that the atmosphere outside was still moving. The radio crackled again. Another crew requested additional spacing. A controller approved it immediately. Traffic compression was getting worse. Aircraft were stacking up around the weather. Delays would spread. Fuel calculations would tighten. Options would shrink. I looked back at the narrow route. Sometimes the safest path is not the most comfortable one. Sometimes the safest path is simply the one that still exists. The captain seemed to know what I was thinking. You always preferred decisive choices. Only when hesitation creates bigger problems. A faint smile crossed his face. The first officer looked between us again. There was history here. He could feel it. He just could not see it yet. A soft knock sounded at the cockpit door. The attendant entered quickly. Captain, passengers noticed the turn. He nodded. Expected. One little girl says her father can fix whatever is wrong. The captain looked down briefly. Then he laughed once. Quietly. Honestly. That sounds like Maya. The attendant smiled. She seems very certain. The mention of her name settled something inside me. I pictured her sitting in seat 8A with the stuffed elephant in her lap. Watching every crew member who passed. Waiting patiently. Trusting me completely. That trust carried weight. More than any title ever had. The attendant left. The cockpit door closed. The captain reached for the radio microphone. Center, confirm route availability. Static answered first. Then the controller responded. The corridor remained open. For now. The captain acknowledged the transmission. His hand lingered on the controls for a second longer than usual. Then another alert chimed. Not the navigation system this time. Weather update. The display refreshed automatically. The corridor narrowed. Not much. But enough. The first officer saw it immediately. It is closing. Slowly, the captain said. But yes. Nobody spoke after that. The decision was approaching. The aircraft continued forward through the darkness. Engine steady. Altitude steady. Yet the situation around us was changing minute by minute. I watched the weather display. The corridor still existed. Barely. The captain looked at me. 20 years seemed to disappear from his face. For a second I saw the younger pilot beneath the gray hair. The officer I had known long ago. If we take this route, he said quietly, I need to know I remember you correctly. Another flash illuminated the clouds ahead. Then the captain asked a question nobody else in the cockpit understood. The captain's eyes never left mine. Instrument lights reflected across the windshield. Outside, the clouds shifted slowly beneath distant flashes of light. The first officer looked between us, completely lost now. What question? He asked. The captain ignored him. His attention remained fixed on me. 20 years ago, he said quietly, when everyone else wanted to turn back, what did you say? The cockpit seemed to grow smaller. The radio hissed softly in the background. Another weather update blinked on a secondary display. I did not need time to remember. Some moments stay with you forever. I said the mission was not the problem, I answered. Panic was. The captain closed his eyes for half a second. Then he nodded. The first officer stared at us. You really know each other. The captain laughed softly. More than that. Another flash illuminated the clouds ahead. The corridor on the weather display narrowed again. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind us that waiting carried its own risks. The captain sat forward. His decision was forming. I could see it. Pilots reveal decisions before they speak them. It happens in their posture. Their focus. Their breathing. The radio crackled. Another aircraft requested an alternate route. The controller denied it. Traffic was becoming crowded. The first officer looked back at the display. We are running out of easy choices. Easy choices disappeared 30 minutes ago, the captain said. Silence returned. The engines continued their steady rhythm. The aircraft remained stable. Yet everything around it was changing. The weather moved. Traffic shifted. Systems demanded attention. I studied the corridor one final time. If we take it now, we stay ahead of the compression. The captain nodded. That is what I see too. The first officer looked uncertain. Not because he disagreed. Because he understood the responsibility. Another alert chimed briefly. Then disappeared. The navigation system flickered once more before stabilizing again. Small interruptions. Constant interruptions. The kind that wear crews down over time. The captain reached for the microphone. Center, this is Flight 721. We are accepting the corridor route. Static answered. Then approval came through. Immediate. Direct. The route was ours. For now. The captain entered the changes. The first officer monitored the update. New headings appeared across the display. New timing. New calculations. The aircraft began a gradual turn. Smooth. Controlled. Almost impossible for passengers to feel. Yet inside the cockpit, everyone noticed. We had committed. The captain exhaled slowly. All right. The first officer checked the weather radar again. Gap still open. Good. Another minute passed. Then another. The turn continued. Outside the windshield, the darkest clouds shifted farther away. The route looked cleaner. Not perfect. Better. A knock sounded at the cockpit door. The attendant entered carrying another note. This time it was folded unevenly. Child handwriting covered the front. The captain smiled before opening it. Maya? I asked. The attendant nodded. She insisted. The captain handed me the note. I unfolded it carefully. The letters were large and slightly crooked. Daddy. I know you are helping. I am not scared. Love, Maya. For a second the cockpit disappeared. The displays. The weather. The alerts. All of it faded behind a simple piece of paper. The captain looked away respectfully. The first officer smiled. The attendant wiped one eye quickly and pretended she had not. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket beside the stuffed elephant. The aircraft continued along its new course. Then the weather radar. Refreshed again, and every face in the cockpit changed. The weather radar refreshed, and the narrow corridor we had committed to looked different. Not closed. Not dangerous. Smaller. The green edges had faded. Yellow pushed inward from both sides. The first officer leaned forward immediately. That was not there a minute ago. The captain studied the display without speaking. Instrument light reflected across his face. Outside the windshield, darkness stretched ahead, interrupted only by distant flashes buried deep inside the cloud layers. The aircraft remained smooth. Stable. Yet every person in the cockpit felt the pressure increase. The route still existed. The margin had changed. The captain adjusted the radar scale. The image sharpened. More detail appeared. More movement. Weather never stays still. That was the problem. How much room? The first officer asked. The captain checked the display. Enough. Then he paused. If it keeps moving at the current rate. Nobody liked conditional answers. The radio crackled again. Another aircraft reported moderate turbulence 20 miles behind us. Then another crew requested a deviation that was denied. The controller sounded busier than before. Traffic was tightening around the system. I looked at the weather display. Then at the navigation data. Then back outside. The aircraft itself was performing exactly as expected. Reliable. Predictable. The challenge was everything around it. A soft vibration moved through the cockpit floor. Barely noticeable. The captain felt it. So did I. The first officer checked another display. Nothing abnormal. Good, the captain said. A moment later, the cockpit door opened slightly. The attendant stepped inside. Captain, passengers noticed lightning. He nodded. Expected. They are asking if we are changing course again. The captain looked toward me briefly. Then back at the attendant. Tell them we are exactly where we intend to be. She smiled faintly. Confidence matters. Especially when borrowed from someone else. After she left, the cockpit settled into focused silence. The first officer monitored traffic. The captain monitored weather. I monitored both. Minutes passed. Small corrections. Small decisions. Hundreds of details working together. Then another flash illuminated the clouds ahead. Brighter this time. The reflection lingered across the windshield for a second longer than before. The first officer looked up immediately. Closer. Yes, the captain said. He reached for the radio and requested an updated weather picture. The response arrived quickly. New data populated the display. The corridor remained open. Barely. The captain stared at it. Then he looked at me. You remember Fallon? The question came out of nowhere. The first officer frowned. Fallon. The captain ignored him. I knew exactly what he meant. A desert sky. A training mission. A younger version of both of us. I remember, I said. The captain nodded slowly. That was the day I learned the difference between confidence and calm. The first officer looked even more confused. Another piece of the story had appeared, but not the whole picture. The captain returned his attention to the displays. You never rushed. His voice remained quiet. Even when everyone else did. Outside the cockpit, thousands of pounds of aircraft moved through darkness at hundreds of miles per hour. Inside, the room felt strangely still. Then a new transmission came through. The controller's voice carried a different tone now. More direct. More urgent. The captain listened carefully. The first officer stopped what he was doing. I watched the captain's expression change before the message even ended. Then he slowly lowered the volume and looked toward the weather display. The corridor was no longer our biggest concern. The captain kept his hand near the radio after the transmission ended. Nobody spoke immediately. The first officer stared at him. Waiting. The weather radar continued to glow across the cockpit. Clouds shifted. Traffic symbols moved. Yet the captain's attention had shifted somewhere else entirely. What is it? The first officer finally asked. The captain looked toward a secondary display. The airport ahead is still available. He paused. But another aircraft just declared an emergency. The first officer straightened instantly. How close? Close enough to affect. Sequencing. The answer settled heavily inside the cockpit. Busy airspace had just become complicated airspace. Outside the windshield, darkness stretched forever. The aircraft remained smooth. Stable. Passengers would not notice the change. Pilots would. Controllers would. Everyone inside the system would. The captain listened to another transmission. The emergency aircraft was receiving priority handling. Runways were being reassigned. Arrival spacing was changing. Every aircraft nearby would feel the ripple effect. The first officer checked the fuel numbers again. We still have margin. Yes, the captain said. But less flexibility. Another small alert chimed. Then disappeared. The navigation system flickered once and returned. I watched the display carefully. The interruptions were becoming familiar. Not dangerous. Distracting. And distractions have a cost. The captain rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. 20 years ago, he said quietly, you saved a mission because you ignored the wrong problem. The first officer looked confused again. What does that mean? The captain smiled faintly. Everyone was staring at the obvious issue. Darius noticed the important one. I kept my eyes on the instruments. The important one usually hides behind the obvious one. The captain nodded immediately. He remembered. Another radio transmission arrived. Controllers updated arrival expectations. Delays were increasing. Aircraft were being rerouted. The first officer looked toward the weather display. So what is the important problem now? Nobody answered right away. The cockpit hummed softly around us. Then I pointed toward the traffic display. Not the weather. Not the navigation system. The traffic. The captain followed my finger. His eyes narrowed. Then understanding appeared. Exactly, he said. The first officer leaned closer. What am I missing? The captain adjusted the display range. More aircraft appeared. More route changes. More converging paths. The pattern became clearer. Everyone is avoiding the same problem, he said. Which means they are creating a new one. The younger pilot stared at the screen. Then realization hit him. Traffic congestion. Bingo, the captain said. Outside, another distant flash illuminated the clouds. The weather looked threatening. Yet the greater challenge now sat inside the displays. Aircraft compressing into fewer corridors. Controllers managing growing complexity. Small mistakes becoming easier to make. The first officer sat back slowly. So we stay ahead of it. That is the plan, the captain replied. A knock sounded at the cockpit door. The attendant stepped inside once more. Her expression looked calmer than before. Captain, I thought you should know. Go ahead. She smiled. The cabin is settling down. The captain nodded. Good. Most of them are following Maya's example. That earned a small laugh from everyone. Even the first officer. What is she doing? I asked. Reading a book and telling people her father is helping. For the first time all night, warmth cut through the tension. The attendant left. The door closed gently behind her. The captain looked forward through the windshield. Then his expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. He pointed toward the darkness ahead. There it is again. The captain pointed through the windshield. At first I saw only darkness. Then another distant flash illuminated the sky ahead. Not lightning. Not weather. Navigation lights. Aircraft lights. A moving cluster far beyond where most passengers would ever notice. The captain adjusted the traffic display. Several symbols shifted across the screen. More than before. The first officer leaned forward. That is a lot of traffic. Exactly, the captain said. The weather had forced aircraft into narrower paths. Controllers were managing it well, but the margin for error was shrinking. Every crew in the region was making small adjustments at the same time. Small adjustments add up. The radio came alive again. One aircraft reported turbulence. Another reported a route change. A third requested additional spacing. The controller responded quickly, but the pace never slowed. The system was working hard. The captain studied the display. We stay predictable. I nodded. Predictable pilots help controllers. The first officer smiled faintly. I am writing that down. Another vibration rolled gently through the aircraft. Not strong enough to concern anyone. Just enough to remind us that the atmosphere remained active. Outside, the clouds looked less threatening now. The corridor had done its job. The weather was beginning to slide behind us. Yet nobody relaxed completely. Experienced crews know better. Problems rarely announce when they are finished. The cockpit door opened slightly. The attendant stepped inside. This time she looked almost cheerful. Captain, I have good news. I like good news. The passengers just felt the smoothest air of the entire flight. The first officer laughed quietly. I like that news too. She glanced toward me. And Maya wants everyone to know her father has not missed bedtime stories in 3 years. I smiled despite myself. That sounds like her. The attendant nodded proudly. She told half the cabin. Then she left again. The door closed softly. The captain looked forward through the windshield. Good kid. She is. Several moments passed in silence. Instruments glowed. Radios crackled. The aircraft continued forward. Stable. Reliable. The first officer checked another display and sat back. Navigation system looks better too. He was right. The interruptions had become less frequent. Not gone. Less frequent. The captain noticed it as well. One problem at a time, he said. Then he looked toward me. You know, there is something he should hear. The first officer looked up immediately. Something I should hear. The captain nodded. His expression softened. 20 years disappeared from his face again. There was a mission a long time ago. I already knew where this was going. Captain, I said. He ignored me completely. Everyone remembers the aircraft, he continued. Everyone remembers the weather. But I remember a young pilot who kept an entire crew focused when things became complicated. The first officer stared at me. You never told me that part. There was never a reason. The captain smiled. There is now. Outside the windshield, the clouds finally began to break apart. Small gaps revealed stars above. The first stars we had seen all night. The captain looked at them for a moment. Then he checked the arrival display. His smile widened slightly. Looks like we are about to receive some very welcome news. The captain's smile remained for only a second before professionalism returned. He adjusted the radio volume and listened carefully. Then he nodded. That is the news I was hoping for. The first officer looked up immediately. What changed? The captain pointed toward the arrival display. Runway sequencing is stabilizing. Traffic is spreading out again. A quiet sense of relief moved through the cockpit. Not celebration. Just relief. The kind professionals allow themselves after a long night. Outside the windshield, the clouds continued to break apart. More stars appeared overhead. The weather system that had dominated the last hour was finally falling behind us. The first officer checked the navigation display. System interruptions have almost stopped. He sounded amazed. The captain smiled. Sometimes the airplane just wants to remind you who is in charge. That earned a laugh from all three of us. Small. Honest. Human. The radio crackled again. This time the controller's voice sounded calmer. Less rushed. More routine. The pace of the night was changing. The aircraft continued smoothly toward its destination. Stable. Predictable. Exactly what every passenger wanted without realizing it. The captain completed another checklist item and leaned back slightly. For the first time since I entered the cockpit, he looked fully relaxed. Then he turned toward the first officer. "You asked how I know him." The younger pilot nodded immediately. "I did." The captain looked at me first, almost asking permission. I shook my head slightly. It would not matter now. He smiled. 20 years ago, I was flying a military mission in terrible conditions. Equipment problems. Bad weather. Too much information arriving too fast. The first officer listened carefully. The captain continued. Everyone was focused on the wrong things. Including me. He pointed toward me. Darius was the calmest person in the aircraft. I looked away toward the windshield. The stars were brighter now. You make it sound dramatic. It was dramatic. The captain laughed softly. He kept the crew focused. He kept us organized. He kept us from creating problems that did not exist. The first officer stared at me for several seconds. Then he smiled. And tonight? The captain answered before I could. Tonight he did the same thing. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. The kind that only arrives after trust has been earned. A knock sounded at the cockpit door. The attendant stepped inside. Her face looked completely different from earlier. Relaxed. Bright. "Captain, passengers are beginning to notice the smooth air." "Good." She glanced at me. "One passenger wanted me to pass along an apology." I already knew who. "That is not necessary." The attendant smiled knowingly. "I thought you would say that." She stepped back toward the door. "And Maya says she would like her father back before landing." That made everyone laugh. Even the captain. "That sounds less like a request," he said. "And more like an order." The attendant nodded. "Exactly." After she left, the captain reached out his hand. I shook it firmly. His grip remained strong despite the years. "You saved my life twice," he said quietly. The first time was 20 years ago. The second time was tonight. I shook my head. "You landed the aircraft." "Maybe." His eyes held mine for a moment. "But you reminded us how." A few minutes later I stepped back into the cabin. Passengers looked up as I passed. Some smiled. Some nodded. Jennifer stood from her seat as I approached row 8. Her confidence from earlier was gone. "Mr. Walker," she said softly. "I am sorry." I looked at her for a moment. Then I smiled. "Have a safe trip." Nothing more needed to be said. Maya wrapped her arms around me the moment I sat down. I pulled the stuffed elephant from my pocket and handed it back to her. She grinned. Outside the window, the first lights of the city appeared below the clouds. The cabin felt warmer now. Quieter. Human. Maya rested her head on my shoulder and closed her eyes. I closed mine too. Like I should have hours earlier.